Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leak. I'm John as always, and this time we're going to take a look at 10 times Magic the Gathering was totally gonna die. Now Magic players, they're not exactly the best at accepting change, and they tend to be a little bit hyperbolic. Just a little bit. This list could actually be huge and will likely spawn a sequel at some point, but here's 10 times throughout the years that Magic the Gathering was definitely totally about to die. Up first, we have the new Slivers. If you're a new player from the past couple years, you may not be familiar with Slivers. Slivers were a creature introduced on the plane of Wrath, and they were a sort of hive mind creature. Each Sliver had an ability that it could give to all other Slivers. All other Slivers, your opponents included. They were these weird, single, mantis-y armed creatures and very alien-looking, something definitely not of this world. They popped up a few more times here or there, and they're an absolutely fan-favorite tribe. Then they disappeared for 7 years. Slivers finally reappeared in Magic 2014, and Magic players were mad. For starters, they weren't the weird, incomprehensible is the correct word there, incomprehensible blobs with the single arm. They were Predator. Just, predators from the movie Predator. That's all they were, humanoid monsters. Not only that, but their abilities were only shared amongst your Slivers, completely changing the impact that Slivers had. Now, yes, that does make it better that your opponents don't get your advantage, but it does remove some of the nostalgia and fun. As a result, many players said that this was a sign of Magic's impending death. That was 3.5 years ago. Up next are border changes. Twice, borders have changed in Magic. The first time was 8th edition. There was a change that needed to be done at the printer's side, and so R&D took some time to make some other fixes to make the cards more readable, including a font change, a box around the power and toughness, etc. With Magic 2015, the border was changed again, this time to add some black space at the bottom so that artist, text, collector's numbers, and other info was machine readable to help with collation at the printers to make, less booster collation mistakes, as well as giving us slightly bigger art boxes. The art is bigger now than it used to be. Both times, players revolted. Many quit, many said that this was absolutely the end of Magic. Some of their cards didn't look like some of their other cards. Other players complained that the new borders somehow killed the fantasy feel of the game, and that this, of course, was going to definitely kill Magic. That was 2.5 years and 13.5 years ago, respectively. Doublefaced Cards are up next, introduced in Innistrad Block and continued through in Shadows of Innistrad Block with a guest appearance in Magic Origins. Doublefaced Cards didn't have a magic back. Although in a weird bit of non-Euclidean geometry, they actually do have a magic back, technically, and they can be flipped over if they somehow become morphed, which means that Doublefaced Cards actually have 3 sides. It's hard to think about, but they have 3 sides. Just go with it. And they all had a mechanic that usually involved a creature transforming into another creature. Werewolves were, of course, the marquee one, their human side becoming their wolf side. This introduced some logistical problems in play. Sleeves were required unless you used the checklist cards, and you had to fiddle with your cards a bit while playing. And other really minor issues that some players determined were just too much and would kill Magic. On average, Doublefaced Cards have been some of the most popular and well-received additions to Magic's wheelhouse, but some segments of the Magic player population were positive that this was absolutely the end. That was 5.5 years ago and 9 months ago, respectively. Basic lands are next. What about basic lands? Well, originally with Magic, you'd buy a starter box, which was like a giant 75-card booster, of which 30 of those cards were lands. Eventually, these were phased out after Shards of Alara, and clumps of land like that were really only in pre-constructed intro decks and fat packs. But boosters are the quintessential way that new and casual players buy into Magic, so how were they going to get those vital lands that we all need? Well, Wizards decided that they would take out a common from every booster pack and replace it with a basic land. This led to a huge outcry as players felt that Wizards were taking a card away from them. Their 15-card boosters were now 14 cards plus a land. I can sort of sympathize with this. Established players do get one less card because they simply don't need lands. I have hundreds, if not thousands of lands kicking around. I throw them out sometimes nowadays. But come on. How many commons are you really interested in having from the average booster? This was going to kill Magic 8 years ago. Up next are the M10 Rules changes, so called because they were introduced with Magic 2010. The rules have had a few major changes over the years, and each one was going to be the end of Magic, but this is the one that I'm going to talk about, the M10 change. So what changed? Well, damage on the stack was removed. Previously, damage was placed on the stack. You could respond to it, perhaps by sacking a creature that was going to die anyway, and that creature's damage would still be dealt. This change did depower some cards. Mana burn was removed. Previously, if you had mana left in your mana pool and went to a new phase, it would empty, like it does right now, except you would also be dealt a damage for each unused mana. Some additional phrases like the battlefield and exiled were introduced as well, and all of these changes were going to trash the quality of the game and utterly kill Magic. That was 7.5 years ago. Planeswalker Points are next. If you play at any sanctioned event, from a casual draft at your store up to a pro tour, you earn Planeswalker Points for attending and more for winning matches. You even get one for drawing a match, but don't draw, you want to play. Having enough points qualified you to attend a World Magic Cup qualifier, and if you get enough Planeswalker Points, you even get 1 or 2 buys at Grand Prix for the year, which is very important. You're not going to win a Grand Prix if you don't have buys. You never lose points. You only ever gain more. Now, prior to this, sanctioned events used an ELO system like chess does, and I believe some MOBAs use it. I think League of Legends uses an ELO or Dota or something. I don't play MOBAs. MTGO still uses this ELO rating. You can see it if you go into your account and game history. Basically, you gain points for winning, and you lose points for losing. But how many points you gain or lose depends on your opponent's rating. A low-ranked player beating a high-ranked player would earn a lot of points, while that high-ranked player would lose a lot of points. A high-ranked player losing to another high-ranked player would result in far fewer points lost and gained. As a result, players whose current rating qualified them for buys or events would actively avoid playing Magic. Because if they lost at an FNM to some low-ranked player, they could actually lose their buys, or they could lose their qualifications for tournaments because they got land screwed. Because they didn't top deck correctly. One game could stop their pro career. Well, turns out Wizard doesn't really like having players not play Magic. They want players to play Magic. And so they introduced the far less punishing Planeswalker Point system. Players were mad. A high Planeswalker Points amount could just mean that you play a lot of Magic, whereas a high ELO rating very clearly meant that you were great, or perhaps just lucky, as a player. You know, it was, to use a crude word, an EPeen rating. It was all about this shows that I'm awesome, whereas this one doesn't necessarily prove that I'm awesome. So players were mad, and it was going to kill Magic 5.5 years ago. Up next, we have a card that you might have never heard of, Nalathni Dragon. It's a 1/1 for 2 red with flying and banding, which I'm not going to talk about. Look it up if you dare. It also has fire breathing, but if you pumped it 4 or more times, it died at the end of turn. Sounds terrible, right? Well, players were mad that this card existed, and its very existence was going to kill Magic. Why? Well, because you could only get this card by going to DragonCon 1994, which means you had to live in or have traveled to Atlanta specifically to get this card. You would never be able to get it unless you bought it from somebody else who did, or you went. This was pre-eBay. This was pre-Star City Games. 94, most people didn't even have internet. You were not going to get this card if you didn't go to that event. And players were absolutely livid. This is one of the few things that Wizards says, hey, you know what? Yeah, we shouldn't do this. And they have since decided that they will never print functionally unique cards outside of sealed products available at the regular market. This was going to kill Magic 23 years ago. Now, I will likely never talk about this again outside of this video because I hate talking with people about it. The reserved list. This is the only thing on the list that is still talked about to this day, but it's been talked about since its creation as well. Wizards created this list in 1996, and for those who don't know, it's a list of cards from early Magic sets that they have promised will never be reprinted in any form ever again, nor will cards be created that are functionally identical with different names. These cards are sacred. They will not be printed again. Now, huge amounts of these cards are worthless. People often don't know or haven't realized this, but I'm pretty sure the majority of cards on the reserve list are worthless. They're garbage. Nobody wants them. But it does include the big ones, the Moxes, Black Lotus, the original Duels, some expensive Commander cards, Gaia's Cradle is on there. As a result, these cards do continue to increase in price, and this incenses players who don't have them, but it also appeases collectors and early adopters who do. There's potentially legal issues with it as well that have never really been figured out, and Wizards will not comment on it, which to me cements the fact that there's some legal issues with it if they won't even comment on it. Now, needless to say, players have been saying since its creation right up until today that this is going to kill Magic. Starting 20 years ago, still hasn't. So, But that's the last that I'm going to talk about the reserved list. So why did the reserved list happen? Well, the reserved list happened because of one thing that I agree would have killed Magic and nearly did. Chronicles. Wizards realized that with new sets coming out so quickly, new players missed old cards from last year or the year before, and Wizards, of course, as we talked about a few points ago, really wants people to play Magic. As a result, they made Chronicles, a 100% reprint set that had tons of important and valuable cards from the sets before it, with the only difference being a white border. They even kept the original expansion symbol for every card. This printing greatly increased the supply of these cards, which served to lower and in some cases crash the cost of those cards, but it also lowered people's trust in Wizards to not just completely tank their investment. This was a sign that at any point, these piles of cards that we all have that are worth hundreds of dollars could be worth pennies. While I strongly advise against ever treating Magic cards like an investment, Chronicles still did represent a problem. Wizards realized this and created the reserved list and have only tried these reprint sets very recently, and they've been very careful with the printing numbers so as to not crash the economy. This was going to kill Magic and might have, had they continued, 21 years ago. The final item on this list is going to be a weird one for all but the oldest of players. The introduction of 60-card decks and 4-card limits. When Magic started, a deck consisted of 40 cards. That was the end of deck construction rules. Your deck must have at least 40 cards. Period. No other rule. 10 Lotuses, 10 Moxes, 10 Channels, and 10 Fireballs? Sure. It's a legal deck. 100% legal. And that's what some people played. And that made Magic an utterly degenerate game where frequently you would lose before you even took a turn. It's obviously a problem that Wizards quickly identified, and they decided that 60-card decks were a bit better of a size, and they introduced the 4 of any non-basic land card limit. This was to ensure some consistency in your deck, but not so much consistency that you expected to have the cards that you wanted every single game. Players were mad. They couldn't play with whatever cards they wanted in whatever configuration, and by requiring more cards, it meant that you had to buy more cards, which was clearly Wizards being super greedy, right? Well, anyways, it was going to utterly kill Magic 23 years ago. So there you have it. Magic has died at least 10 times over, and trust me, this list could be double as long, if not longer, so I will most definitely do a sequel at some point, because hey, a new decry that Magic is going to die happens basically every week. Let me know what your favorite times that Magic was going to die were, which ones you truly believed that were going to kill Magic. Let me know below in the comments. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at The Mana Leak. That's L-E-E-K, like the vegetable, not the card. You can also find me at facebook.com/The Mana Leak, twitch.tv/The Mana Leak, and patreon.com/The Mana Leak if you want to back the channel financially. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, see y'all next time.